By the end of this video, you should hopefully feel way more confident in creating smoother and more stable shots. I'll be going over the best settings in Final Cut Pro for this, lots of examples, some plugin options that may or may not suck, and even what you can do while filming to make stabilization work better for you when you hop into Final Cut. I'll start by saying this. Better stabilization in post starts with better stabilization practices while filming. So filming tip number one is to either use a gimbal, which is a stabilizing device that uses motors and sensors to keep your camera steady while it's being moved, or for a cheaper alternative with a less stabilized look, just add some weight to your camera. This could be a top handle, a monitor, an external battery. Hell, you could even tape a water bottle or something to your camera. Adding a little bit of weight helps to stabilize your footage by removing a lot of the micro jitters that comes with just holding the camera and filming. In fact, in this video portrait I created, the entire video was shot handheld, but with more weight from a monitor, a top handle, and an external battery. Next, we have some filming techniques to minimize that shake that happens when you're moving and filming. First and foremost, the more you move around and hold your camera away from your body, the shakier your footage will be. That may seem obvious to some, but it is an important point to remember while filming. Think of a caterpillar crawling on a tree in a storm. That caterpillar is going to be way more stable in that storm if he's crawling on the trunk of the tree or close to the trunk, as opposed to farther out on the branches. The same applies with the camera and your body. So tuck your arms in like you're a T-Rex and bring the camera as close to your body as possible. So with that implemented, you can minimize shake even more using some other simple techniques while moving and filming. The first technique is called ninja walking.
All right, Ninja Master.
Pretty commonly known, but nevertheless, it involves you basically sneaking around with your camera. You get in an athletic position and try and softly bring your feet down to the ground, starting with your heel first, and then rolling to the toe. The key is focusing on keeping your head on the same plane, so not moving it up and down while walking if possible. That's a technique when you need to walk around with the camera, but what about when you don't want or need to walk around at all, but you want to add a little extra movement into your shot so it's not just a static shot or a pan? This is a move I do a lot because it will help to not only add some cool movement to your footage, but it'll also keep your shots relatively stable. Hold the camera close to your body, so tuck those arms in, and make that thing basically become a part of you, and slide from left to right very gently. Focus on keeping your head at the same level, and for an extra dimension of movement, rotate your body while hip sliding so you can perform a stabilized pan to keep your subject more in frame. And fun fact, this is also the only way I know how to dance. Camera settings are also important for stable footage. Of course, you should turn on stabilization on your camera and on your lens if you have that option, but there are some other settings that will help you to stabilize easier and more effectively in post. One thing you can do actually is increase the shutter speed on your camera to get rid of some motion blur. This will aid Final Cut in stabilizing that shot efficiently. Why is that? Trying to analyze something that's blurry obviously doesn't lead to the best results. I can hear some of you saying, but I want that cinematic motion blur that comes from having my shutter speed double the frame rate that I'm shooting in. And rightfully so, it looks good. But if you have a shot that you really want to be stable, increasing your shutter speed will help out when using stabilization tools in post. You can always add that motion blur back in post with a plugin like Real Smart Motion Blur, but of course it never looks as good. The other thing you can do is shoot in a higher frame rate so you can slow it down in post. Those shakes and jitters in your shots will then be much more gradual and smoother. From there, you can stabilize even more by using FCP's stabilization. The last thing I want to mention before we hop into Final Cut is that what you're shooting will also determine how stable your shot will be. Shooting in a dark setting with minimal contrast will make it really hard for the software to determine what is what. It actually doesn't even have to be a dark setting. Having a shot with minimal contrast in general will result in worse stabilization. Just something to keep in mind. I've also found poor stabilization results when my camera is too close to the subject, when the camera moves in all directions instead of in fairly straight lines, and when there is rapidly changing lighting. You can find the built-in stabilization tools in Final Cut by opening your inspector window with your clip selected, and head down to Stabilization. When you turn on stabilization in Final Cut Pro, or any software for that matter, the software will do its best to identify what movement is unwanted shake from the camera, what movement is from the subject in your shot, and what the background is. If FCP thinks your camera quickly moved to the left, it'll compensate by increasing the scale of the shot as needed and then moving the shot to the right. The goal of this is to obviously cancel out that shaky movement to the left so it looks smooth. But once again, in order to do this, Final Cut has to make your shot bigger, which will cause some worsening of your shot's resolution. Your aim should be to increase stabilization to the point where it reduces a lot of the shake, yet doesn't scale in that much so your shot doesn't have a big reduction in resolution. Just try and find that happy medium when you're trying to stabilize a clip. Also, I want to point out that the longer your clip is and the more movement you make in it, the more potential there will be for the stabilization to become wonky. That's because stabilization works on the whole clip. So cut your clips first if you need to, stabilize those sections that need stabilizing, and maybe add some B-roll in between to cover up those cuts. Okay, so once you click this, Final Cut Pro automatically analyzes what it thinks is the best form of stabilization for the shot. Final Cut will choose two options. It can either be InertiaCam or SmoothCam. My advice before I explain these two to you is to not always trust what Final Cut suggests. Try both at different settings to see what works for your shot. InertiaCam does a great job in a lot of situations. Apple says it's optimized for video footage that has camera moves such as pans and zooms, but to be honest, this is what I choose 9 times out of 10 because it tends to stabilize the clips the most without producing a lot of that wonkiness that you'll sometimes see in stabilized clips. Take this shot. All I'm doing is a hip slide with a heavier camera rig. There's a decent amount of shake, and this clip has even been slowed down. This is how shaky it looks when it's full speed. Slowing the clip down and then pushing my InertiaCam slider to the default maximum of 3 results in really beautiful stabilization. Final Cut has an easy time deciphering what's unwanted camera shake, what's the environment, and what our subject is. And it scales in very minimally, which is great, so we've pretty much kept the same resolution. A cool tip that you may or may not know is that by pushing up on the setting here, you can actually increase the amount of stabilization in your shot past the default max. However, I want to point out that it seems as if there's a limit, depending on the shot. You'll see here that it stops scaling around 6, and then it just sputters back and forth a few points. Sometimes the number it does this at will be different, and how much it improves the stabilization is questionable, but I thought I should let you know about it. The last thing I want to mention about InertiaCam is that you have this tripod mode option down here. This lets you fully stabilize a shot so it looks like it's locked down on a tripod. The issue is that this setting will be grayed out and unavailable unless Final Cut thinks that it can lock down the clip. The second stabilization option in Final Cut is SmoothCam. SmoothCam is the option that only works once in a blue moon, in my opinion. You'll see we have 3 sliders here. Translation Smooth helps with horizontal and vertical movement, Rotation Smooth compensates for unwanted rotation, and Scale Smooth compensates for shaky zooms. Out of these 3, Translation Smooth is the most beneficial, and sometimes you can even turn down or turn off the other 2 to get a better result. For example, in this shot of mine, Final Cut automatically suggested SmoothCam. The tough thing about this shot, though, is that there's not much for Final Cut to distinguish what the environment is that the subject is in. That's why, if we watch the stabilization, it's almost acting like a locked-on stabilization effect. Unfortunately, there's no way around this for this particular shot, and switching to InertiaCam looks horrible. So what you could do is tweak these settings to get the best possible stabilization with the least possible scaling in amount. Like I just mentioned, Translation Smooth is usually going to be the most beneficial, so let's bump this up. We're not doing any zooming or even moving the camera forward or back from the subject at all, so let's bump this down to 0, and let's adjust the rotation to taste. Just play around with these settings to find what works best for your shots. Now sometimes both InertiaCam and SmoothCam won't work. In that case, you may just have to accept the fate of a little shakiness or find another shot. For example, with this shot, I'm doing a slow push-in with the gimbal to this monk here. All of the stabilization settings won't fix this shake. And sometimes you just have to accept that. That's why doing things to try and stabilize your footage before you even hop on the computer is so beneficial though. The two main stabilization plugins for Final Cut Pro are Lock and Load from CoreMelt and FCPX Stabilizer 2.0 from Pixel Film Studios. In my opinion, save yourself some money and don't buy them. Lock and Load used to be good, but now it doesn't compare to Final Cut's native stabilization for some reason. And Pixel Film Studios Stabilizer is only useful if you want that Beats by Dre locked-on stabilization effect. Until a solid stabilization plugin comes out, the built-in option is going to be your best bet. If this is not the first video you've seen of mine and you aren't subscribed yet, consider doing so, and also check out this video to learn some tricks of the trade to make you that much better of a Final Cut Pro editor. Have a great day, guys.